Hello, and welcome to Music City Murder, a podcast about the crimes and history of Nashville, Tennessee. I'm your host, T. Blake Brady, but you friends can call me Tyler. Thank you so much for joining me. Music City Murder is meant to give people an insight not just into the most famous murders in and around Nashville, but also the city's history as well. What makes it tick? I'm an educator by day and a writer by night. You can find my books, namely the Rolson McCain Southern Mystery Series, on Amazon and in Parnassus Books down in Green Hills. If you're a fan of James Lee Burke's Dave Robichaux series, you'll probably dig my books too. One last thing before we begin. If you like what you hear, be sure to rate and review it on the Apple Podcasts app. It's the little purple icon on your phone. Being a new show, the ratings and reviews can help to distinguish MCM from the hundreds of millions of podcasts that are out there. Doesn't matter what you say, just give the show 5 stars. I don't know how it helps, but I know that it does. It has something to do with the algorithm, I think. I don't know. But that said, let's get on with the show. My sources for this episode will be a ton of articles from the Tennessean, WKRN. Just basically, I Googled the victims and the perpetrator in this crime and managed to find a cache of things that helped me. So I'll put those into the show notes. I relied heavily on them, as I do with every episode. So be sure to check out those articles. I try to give credit where credit is due when possible. And that's it. So this is a Christmas episode. Should I say Merry Christmas, folks? I think not. But we are going to start this week's episode on a famous street in Nashville. No, I'm not talking about Broadway. No, this is Division Street. For the uninitiated, Division Street is part of Midtown Nashville and was originally called Broad Street because of its size. According to local historian Ridley Wills II's book, Nashville Streets and Their Stories, Division Street is, and this is a direct quote, an important connector street between Music Row and 8th Avenue South. In 1910, the street was the dividing line between the 10th and 11th civil districts, hence the name. The area of Midtown encapsulates parts of downtown Nashville, Music Row, and Hillsborough Village, as well as Vanderbilt. These days, it's a loud and rollicking part of Nashville's nightlife. There are bars with clever names like Rebar, which is surrounded by the industrial strength metal material for which it's named, and Winners and Losers, two halves of the same bar, one of which is a karaoke joint. And my wife once achieved second on the skee ball machine at either Winners and Losers, and I can't remember which, but I don't know if anyone's beaten it, but she was on a roll one day, and hopefully it still stands. It was a pretty nice record. She definitely killed me. So there you go. So Division's a street where you can feel the energy. It's as alive as the people who flock to all of the establishments there. And there's a very specific reason for that. It's the kind of college-centric portion of the city. You see, Vanderbilt is nearby and is thus the beating heart of Midtown. And though I think there's hardly a city like Athens, Georgia, certain parts of Midtown come pretty close if you include Hillsborough Village with its curious shops and hipster coffee joints. And in fact, if you remember back to the Sarah Dupre episode, it takes place mostly in Midtown. So it's that area, tucked kind of, near West End, near downtown, but not quite. And if I haven't put a finer point on it by now, I'm just going to go ahead and do that and say that Division is kind of where it's a young part of Nashville. It's where a lot of the young people hang out. I'm sure some tourists go there, but it's not the tourist destination that the honky tonks on Broadway are. So it's possessed of a totally different vibe. It's Division. Let's fast forward to Christmas time last year, 2019. As you can see, this is a fairly recent case, so I'll be a little more circumspect about the facts than I usually am, since this is still ostensibly being adjudicated in the courts. I'm going to bounce around a little bit to give you as much of a vision of the story as possible, but I'll try to make sure that you stay in the loop so that you don't get lost here. We're going to start the night at a restaurant/bar called the Dogwood It's located at 1907 Division Street, and if you're unfamiliar with that name, you might remember it as the former location of Soulshine Pizza. That's what I know it as. It is the night of December 21st, the early morning hours, and things are going as they normally do on Division. The road is crowded, and people not just in bars, but out on the streets with their drinks or cigarettes, and just going home, going to another place, having fun, being loud, waiting on friends. Everything you imagine in a young, collegey part of town. But it's not that way for long. I'm going to start by introducing you to 3 college students. The first being Clayton Beathard, 22, Paul Trapeni III, 21, and AJ Buthurum, who's also at 21. They, all 3 are hanging out at the Dogwood with a female friend of theirs. All 3 boys were graduates of Battleground Academy in Franklin, Tennessee. It's a private college prep school. I believe it's a Christian establishment as well. Classes are over. It's Christmas time. They're back for the holidays. Being newly of age, they're looking for a good time. This is an ostensible kind of class reunion for former BGA students. Like AJ Buthurum goes to Tennessee over in Knoxville. So they're just getting back together the way friends do once they've kind of parted ways post-high school. And I'm going to leave those 3 there for now. Just imagine them in the Dogwood, drinking beer, hanging out, standing around, listening to music, having a good time on a chilly night in Nashville. We're going to hop over to another person. It's a man named Michael Mosley. He's a year older, a couple years older than the other kids. He's 23 years old, and I'm just going to say it out front. Seems like he might be a troubled young man, and I'm going to let you be the judge of that. Even at this age, he's had several run-ins with the law. I'm going to detail each of these just to give you a perspective about this person, Michael Mosley. Here's a direct quote from a Tennessean article I managed to find, penned by one Mariah Timms. Quote, Mosley was convicted in February 2018 on 2 counts of robbery for the armed robbery of 3 people on Edmondson Pike. In December 2017, Mosley was convicted on 2 counts of felony aggravated assault for the stabbing of a man and cutting a woman on Colt Drive. Mosley was also convicted of misdemeanor assault in March 2016 for squirting urine from a shampoo bottle on an employee at the Davidson County Jail facility on Christmas Day in 2015. At the time of this event, December 2019, Michael Mosley's out on bond. Yeah, a $5,000 bond related to the felonious assault of a woman named Molly Baker. According to court documents, he punched and kicked Baker in a Walmart in West Nashville. Probably know where I'm talking about, over by the Lowe's. There's a lot of restaurants. There's a Cracker Barrel. It's a Waffle House. It's over in that area, Nashville West. There is video of this incident, and admittedly, it's pretty disturbing to watch. I'll try to include a link to it in the show notes. In the video, Mosley slams into the woman, knocking her to the ground, and then he starts viciously attacking her, kicking her and punching her while she's on the ground, as well as purportedly stabbing her in the eye with a key, while shocked onlookers kind of stare in amazement. That was December 2018. It seems like this guy has a pattern. This goes all the way back to December 2015. There's something psychologically, there's some depths to plumb there. And the assault itself is not the weirdest part. Here's where the story gets ultra weird. And I know that I just told you a story about Michael Mosley assaulting a woman, but let's not bend over backwards to feel sorry for Molly Baker but just yet, because Molly Baker and her husband Daniel Baker were allegedly involved in the 2016 murder of a man named Gregory Sanders, who was shot outside of his home in Ashland City in 2016. And then, yes, there's more, Michael Mosley would later be charged with a crime because he instigated an assault on Daniel Baker, husband of the woman Mosley attacked in Walmart, while the both of them were in the same jail. You can actually find footage of this online as well as a kind of semi-famous story. It's a huge, not quite riot, and people were sent to different jails after this and had to be moved around. And the question you're probably asking is why? why would Michael Mosley attack these people and stay after them? As it turns out, Gregory Sanders was Michael Mosley's stepbrother. And so the attacks were probably retribution for their supposed involvement in Sanders' death. All right, so now that we have a good sense of all of the people involved in this story, let's get to what actually happened in the early hours of December 21st. There isn't a court record, no trial yet, so I'm going to rely almost exclusively on the words of one of the young men involved for this part of the story. Clayton Beathard, Paul Trapeni, and A.J. Buthurum are all on Christmas break, like I said, out on the town as an unofficial reunion among friends, and they're hanging out at Dogwood. One of the ironies of this event is that all of this happens as the night is winding down. In fact, A.J. Buthurum is standing on a corner waiting for a ride outside the Dogwood when he sees his female friend, who had been with the three young men that night, get pushed to the ground. Buthurum, who witnesses the whole situation, rushes over to defend his female friend. He punches the aggressor in the face, and then the next moment he feels an intense pain in his left eye, and his vision goes black. Buthurum would later go on to say that he thought at the time he had just been punched really hard in the eye. At that point, Buthurum realizes his friends have been stabbed, and he rushes over to help the both of them. He tries to pull up Clayton Beathard to his feet, and he is eyeing his friend to see what kind of injuries he suffered, when one of the Dogwood bouncers rushes over and informs Buthurum that he too has been stabbed in his eye, just like Molly Baker. Only it wasn't a key this time. Trigger warning for the squeamish here. This is a direct quote from A.J. Buthurum from the article regarding the extent of the injury to his eye. Quote, "I was stabbed on the left side of my left eye. The blade kind of went through the posterior portion of my eyeball, if you would, and then went through my skull where my brain is. There was an air pocket between my brain and my skull, very messed up retina. I was also stabbed in the left arm," end quote. So, from an article on WKRN by Stephanie Langston. And it's just a nightmare of a quote. Eye stuff I can't handle. And if you can, God bless you. Buthurum would later endure 2 surgeries and is still recovering from those injuries. There's a still visible laceration on his eye, and he suffers from blurry vision in that eye, the left eye. The other 2 victims, unfortunately, aren't so lucky, if I can say such things about this tragedy. Luck is an odd word to use here. Both Paul Trapeni III and Clayton Beathard are stabbed in the heart, and they die shortly after the attack. The story becomes national news almost immediately. The San Francisco 49ers release a statement on Twitter the next day because Clayton Beathard is the younger brother of C.J. Beathard, a backup quarterback for the 49ers. And here's the entire quote. "The 49ers family was shocked and deeply saddened to learn of the tragedy involving C.J. Beathard's younger brother, Clayton. We extend our heartfelt sympathies to C.J. and the entire Beathard family as they cope with the unthinkable loss of a loved one. C.J. has traveled home to join his family, knowing he has the support of our entire organization as they grieve the passing of Clayton." The Dogwood, too, releases a statement. Quote, "First and foremost, our thoughts are with the families of the victims. The stabbing that occurred last night was not inside Dogwood, but across the street on Division after Dogwood had closed. Dogwood is working closely with local authorities and has shared footage from outside the establishment in the hopes of catching the perpetrator. We, along with the local authorities, encourage anyone with more information to please contact the police." At this point, Michael Mosley is nowhere to be found, and there is a widespread manhunt being undertaken to find him. The Midtown Hills precinct begins the investigation, but soon the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation gets involved, and Mosley is added to the TBI's most wanted list on Christmas Eve 2019. Unfortunately for everyone involved, the manhunt doesn't last much longer because on Wednesday, December 25th, Christmas Day, a SWAT team and assorted other police officers surround a vacant home in Ashland City, Cheatham County, 28 miles away from the site of the stabbings. The house has been unoccupied for over 4 years. An officer gets on the megaphone and orders the person hiding inside to step out into the light. The sound is loud enough to draw neighbors from their homes to watch as onlookers. As the figure, who turns out to be Michael Mosley, emerges from the home, the SWAT team swoops in and arrests him. Michael Mosley is officially in custody for the murders of Beathard and Trapeni. The family and friends of all those involved hold a candlelight vigil on the steps of the old Franklin Courthouse on Thursday, December 26th, the day after Christmas, to remember the victims. Hundreds attend the vigil, including surviving victim A.J. Buthurum. Michael Mosley is later indicted on 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, 1 count of attempted premeditated murder, and 1 count of assault. He enters a not guilty plea in late June of 2020, so about 6 months ago, and his lawyer, Justin Johnson, contends that the attack was an act of self-defense. Here's a direct quote from Justin Johnson, Esquire. The 3 people, the 2 deceased and the one that was injured, came to him, and they are the ones that, and I hate to say it, brought it on themselves. This is pure self-defense, and I'm going to ask the court to rule that, end quote. Now, defense attorneys have a tough job, and I know that. But it's just hard to hear those kinds of quotes, and I think you probably agree with that, considering what we've just talked about here. Moving on, Michael Mosley's mother believes, too, that he acted in self-defense and would not have responded with such violence if he did not believe his life to be in danger. His previous run-ins with the law notwithstanding, I suppose. Michael Mosley is currently being held at the Davidson County Jail awaiting trial. And I just got a text notification yesterday that all jury trials are on hold until at least February of 2021. You can expect an update from the podcast once the trial has taken place. And even though, or perhaps because there is no formal legal resolution to this case, I thought I would end this episode with some words about one of the victims. I mean, it's Christmas time, and I know that this show is meant to be true crime. But I think we could all use at least some amount of joy, even if it is as a means for getting a semblance of, I think, solace in the death of someone whose life was taken at 21. So here is a statement of the Beathard family that was released in the wake of the attacks. I'm going to read it verbatim, just so you know. Quote, "It's times like this I wish I had Instagram and social media because the love and prayers have been so overwhelming that we cannot possibly thank every single one of you at the rate they come in text and phone calls. Clay was an amazing, big, and soft-hearted human being with an undeniable love for the Lord. He had his family's, friends, and teammates' backs to a fault. I wish he would have been more inclined to take the high road, but he hated wrong. Yes, he was stubborn sometimes, but mostly because his beliefs were strong. He lived a full life, he lived a full life, except for the chance at being the incredible father I knew he would have been. He loved kids, underdogs, and the less fortunate. His little sister was his world, and his love and pride for his older brothers and Charlie was off the charts. He will be missed. That's an understatement. Nobody's light shined like his when he smiled. That's what we will hold in our hearts because we know he's smiling now. He always worried about all of our welfare, never his own. I say that to know that those who knew and loved him, please lean into the Lord's strength, trust in the Lord, and carry on. Carry him with you like a chip on your shoulder, like the one he carried. He loved people saying he couldn't do something. That's where he thrived mostly. He was never afraid of a challenge, so please, all of you, take on the next challenge with faith in God and knowing Clay is smiling down and has your back. I love all of you, and I love God for the gift he was to us for a little while. I beg your thoughts and prayers go out to whoever committed this act, but the Trapeni family also. I think there's a lot of truth in that statement that can be gleaned for anyone in the listening audience. And here's another quote. Because perhaps the nature of this episode and the timing, I just thought it'd be necessary to reflect on these victims as people and not just as stories that titillate us for being gruesome and sad. So here we go. This is from Clayton Beathard's former football coach at Battleground Academy, Rock Baton. Quote, "It was such an honor to coach a kid like Clay. Of course, he had many accolades on the field, but beyond that, he was a great person who had such a big heart. I'll remember him for his confidence and his poise under pressure, his big smile, and his leadership. He had a presence about him, and he wanted people to be around him. One of my favorite pictures of Clay was a picture taken of him with my son after a big win at Page High School in an overtime win where Clay took a risk to help us. My son looked up to him, and he was just the kind of young man I wanted my son to be around and aspire to be. I love his entire family, and I'm grieving with them over his untimely passing. Paul was a tough player who played and outworked people on the field. Off the field, he was a great person, fun to be around. He had such a humorous personality and made others smile and laugh. He was a good friend to others and a great teammate. I was fortunate to coach a young man who was so passionate about football and a good friend to many." End quote. I could have very easily been one of the three victims in this case. I think that's one of the reasons why this one hit so close to home for me. Is I was a college student. I went to the University of Georgia, and I'm sure that there are some of you in the audience who did your fair share of partying in college, and I can only imagine what I would have done had I seen a friend of mine, that is not to say a female friend of mine, be pushed to the ground. Being a Southern man raised the way I was by my mama, I would have taken it personally and stepped in, and this very easily could be any one of us, I think. And it hits hard, hits home, and it just has me reflective about the nature of victimhood, that it truly is random. And then nobody really earns anything in life, and that you can't count on anything in life. And that you should just cherish what you have, because what you have may not be there always. And that's not to be depressing about it, but I think it's important to always think about who you are and where you stand and what you want to stand for, even if it ends this way. And that's it for this episode 13 of my Music City Murder. I'm your host, Tyler, and if you haven't already, make sure you go and rate and review the podcast on the Apple app, as well as wherever you listen to it. I'm an Overcast listener, so that's where I listen to my podcast. So wherever you listen to the podcast, go give it a review. And we do have a Patreon. I've lowered the prices because my computer broke for a month, and I missed one of the extra episodes, which I've just uploaded. And so everyone in the dollar tier gets the extra episode a month. So for $1, for what the tip you give on one Starbucks coffee, you can get an extra episode of this podcast for a month. So go over to patreon.com/Music City Murder to get in on that. As always, I'm your host, Tyler, and I really appreciate you joining me for another edition of Music City Murder.